there is no such thing as a bad experiment. Every experiment is going to teach you something about your audience. Every experiment is going to provide a learning. Every experience is going to be an opportunity for you to learn as a marketer. And everything can be tested. There are multitudes of things that you can test, and you won't know unless you do it. So if you're thinking about it, do it. Even if you aren't thinking about it, do it. So a growth experiment differs from a traditional A/B test because with a growth experiment, you're getting into the growth mindset. You have a distinct and clear hypothesis that can be nullified. You have a certain power and significance to determine the winner. You're documenting your methodology. And you're going into it, starting with your audience, not your product. You're mapping the user's mental mode and you're making observations, not judgments. The first step to a growth marketing experiment is to get in the growth mindset. So as I said, starting with your audience, not the product, mapping the user's mental model and making observations, not judgments. Those are the three first steps that you want to implement when you're doing a growth experiment. You also want to understand why you are doing it, and you want to create a hypothesis. You also need to determine whether you're going to be running a macro or a micro experiment. The difference there is that a macro experiment is basically a new strategy or a new direction, while a micro experiment is an experiment that you execute under a macro experiment. So a macro experiment could be onboarding onto a new platform, such as TikTok. And then a micro experiment underneath that macro experiment could be utilizing product-focused content versus humanity-focused content. And that could be, your micro experiment that you're running under that macro experiment to determine if that channel is going to be profitable and successful and allow you to connect to your community. The type of growth experiments that we have are macro and micro experiments. On a day-to-day basis, as a marketer, you're most likely running micro experiments without even realizing that you're running them. Examples include adding negative keywords to your search ads, testing new copy on a Facebook ad, A/B testing a landing page, maybe it's a homepage versus a category page, or making minor design changes. For one client, it was adding serif font as a headline in the creatives. So these are going to be the experiments that you're probably running on a day-to-day basis without even realizing it. Now, a macro experiment is a little bit bigger. It's a new strategy, a new plan, a new direction. Examples include onboarding onto a new platform where you think that there's potential but you have not tried yet. So you're pioneering a new frontier, you would say. That could be TikTok, that could be Spotify ads, that could be anything. A new campaign or campaign type. Perhaps you want to split your campaigns into mobile versus desktop. A new landing page or a new sign-up flow, new value prop messaging, new content, or even a new audience. So these are the two types of growth experiments, and you're going to be running into macro experiments more likely than you are macro. But macro experiments tend to really have the most long-term impact, while micro experiments will really give you that immediate impact. A growth experiment has to start with a falsifiable and testable hypothesis. A lot of times, I've run into marketers that say, I want to test the CTA color on this add to cart page. My simple question is why? They say, I believe that if we test the color, it will increase the add to cart rate. And now I say to them, that's how you frame it. I believe we can increase our add to cart rate with a red versus yellow CTA for the add to cart button. So you always want to have a falsifiable and testable hypothesis. You want to know what colors are you going to be testing in that CTA? For how long are you going to be testing that? So some examples could be, I believe showcasing humanity versus products and ad creatives will increase the click-through rate because it will relate better to the user. Or, I believe the landing page we currently use doesn't provide the best experience, and directing users to a product page with less barriers to checkout will have a higher conversion rate. And the last one, I believe that by changing the banner on our website to something more representative of our core customer demographic, visitors will convert more frequently. Now, all hypotheses have an opposite called the null hypothesis. If our hypothesis states that we believe there is a difference between our control and the treatment, the null hypothesis states its opposite. There is no difference. So, going back to those examples that I just gave, the example of the null hypothesis would be if we showcase humanity in ads instead of products, we will not see any higher click rate. Or if we direct users to product pages instead of the homepage, we will not increase conversion rate. And lastly, if we change our website banners, visitors will not convert more frequently. And lastly, there's two parts to these experiments. So you have lagging versus leading indicators. So one of the primary goals of experimentation is to understand the causal relationships between these two indicators. So a lagging indicator is an outcome. It's going to be your data point, the numbers that you're going to show to the big boss. So those examples include revenue, downloads, signups. And your leading indicators are the influencers of those lagging indicators. They predict how lagging indicators might be affected over time. They're oftentimes really hard to pinpoint and equally hard to measure. So some examples of leading indicators might be your customer satisfaction, your brand growth, and your brand awareness. To ensure that you're running a proper experiment, you want to make sure that you have a hypothesis that's both testable and nullifiable, right? And then to ensure that you're running a proper test, there are 3 other things that you need to ensure. That you have correct statistical data, that you have the proper sample size, and that you have the power and significance to run this experiment. So power and significance, they're both inputs and outputs, right? So to calculate the sample size, you must decide on the appropriate power and significance levels. So the standard significance level, so significance is going to be your alpha, is 5%. So that means 95%. And the typical power level, which is a beta, is 80%. So these two values are used to determine how many test samples you would need to observe at the smallest detectable effect at a 95% significance level 80% of the time. Now, I know that sounds really complicated, but there's a lot of online platforms that can help you with this. Monotate is an online A/B testing platform that already has these power and significance calculators built into their platform, and there's a ton of other ones if you don't have an A/B testing platform that can calculate your sample size, your significance testing, the Bayesian analysis. Like, there's all these different things online that you can go to for tools, and when I'm explaining it, you don't really have to do it manually, but you can if you want to. Sometimes I think there's a little bit of power in running these tests manually because you're really going to get into the data and understand what your experiment outcome is. So say, for example, your control is 20,000 users or sessions and your conversions are 500. You have a 2.5 conversion rate. In variation 1, you've determined that you need 15,000 sessions as your sample size, and you run that for 30 days and you get 525 conversions. You actually can see that you have about 174 extra transactions to ensure that your test basically has the significance level needed to determine what is the winning split. So, it could be a 3.5 conversion rate. That's a 40% lift. That's going to be your winner when it comes to, the outcome of that experiment. Also, you need to predetermine what methodology that you'll use, what you're analyzing and why. Otherwise, you're likely to fall prey to type 1 and 2 errors. So that's your false positives and your false negatives. So to document your methodology, you want to have your hypotheses, which, what you expect to happen and the change to be made. Those dependent variables, what are your test outcomes, methodology, what type of statistical test will you use on the data and why, your sample size, how will you calculate that sample size and what's the expected number. Like your analysis plan, which segments of data are you going to be analyzing? Which metrics? Is it conversion rate? Is it click-through rate? Is it the ROAS on your ad? Your test execution plan. How will this test be run? Where and when? Is it a Facebook ad? Is it a display ad? Is it an on-site A/B test? These are things that you need to understand before you do it. And then your dependencies. What sort of resources will be needed for this test? If it's a A/B test on Facebook, you might need a little extra budget on this, so that way you can really get the power and significance level needed to determine which split is winning. So that is the key to ensure that you're running a proper growth experiment. I determine power and significance by using an online test calculator. So let's say, I have two different splits, the control and variation 1. And over a 30-day period, my control got 20,000 sessions and 500 conversions. My conversion rate is 2.5. I can use an online calculator to say, okay, I want to run this test for 30 days and I want to give it to 50% of the traffic. It'll tell me how many users or sessions variation 1 will need and how many conversions variation 1 will need and how many extra conversions come out of that. And I basically just use a sample size calculator. There's like cxl.com, which has an A/B test calculator. Analyticstoolkit.com that has an A/B test ROI calculator. Evan Miller's website has a really good sample size calculator. I found this other forum on GitHub that has an ABBA demo to generate that power and significance. And then abtestguide.com has a Bayesian analysis as well. There's a lot of different ways that you can document your methodology, your experiment, the outcome of the experiment, and the learnings of your experiment. I know a lot of marketers who just straight up use an Excel document to really document this. Here at NoGood, we actually have specific decks for each experiment that we're about to run, and we like to create these to show them visually to our clients. So we'll, put down what the hypothesis is, what our observation is, what the experiment will be, what channels we'll be running this on. We also like to include a timeline for the clients as well, the execution plan, and then, determining what's the sample size needed, what's the time frame that we're going to run this, how long are we going to run this, and then we'll come back to it after that sample size has been hit for that length of time, and then we'll document, okay, we ran an A/B test on 2 different ad variations, and ad variation 1 had a 2.5 click-through rate during this time period, and ad variation 2 had a 1.5 click rate on this. So you take a look at, okay, what were the difference in the variations based on our hypotheses, and what did we learn from this? And then we move forward with additional rapid experimentation. One of my recent growth experiments that I've run and what the results were, we have this client that is in the software space, and right now our best campaign for them is running a competitor campaign. So we wanted to run tests in other areas, maybe coders that are in school, in boot camps, that maybe haven't, created a decentralized application yet, but are looking to maybe get into that space. The thing was, this experiment was a little bit too broad in the targeting. We were targeting people that were interested in coding boot camps and interested in different online resources to understand coding, but we were missing a pivotal aspect of it, and that was the Web3 aspect of it. So that experiment wound up not really turning out with good results. So in this case, we move forward and look for other audiences to target for customer acquisition. There is no such thing as a bad experiment. Every experiment is going to teach you something about your audience. Every experiment is going to provide a learning. Every experience is going to be an opportunity for you to learn as a marketer. And everything can be tested. There are multitudes of things that you can test, and you won't know unless you do it. So if you're thinking about it, do it. Even if you aren't thinking about it, do it.